Welcome back to Take Charge. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja.
And I'm Tim Stenovec in New York. It's time now for Quick Take by the Numbers. It's where we give you the numbers that tell the story. This morning's number is 150. More than 150 police officers in Minneapolis have left the police force or retired early in the year since George Floyd was murdered. The police force is now at a third of its former size. The guilty verdict of Derek Chauvin in April brought some short-lived relief, but his conviction did little to address the city's more fundamental problems with its embattled police department. Chauvin's sentencing is scheduled for June 25th, and with 2 more police officers set to be tried next year, the department is still under a microscope. Its practices are now under investigation by the Department of Justice.
And joining us now is Bloomberg's Sarah Holder. She's actually on the ground in Minneapolis, and she's been reporting on this story pretty extensively. So, Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Just describe the scene that you are in right now for us.
Thanks for having me. So I'm right in front of the Black Power fist sculpture in the center of George Floyd Square, right across from Cup Foods, where George Floyd was killed a year ago today. People are already gathering. They're looking at some of the memorials to Floyd and to Breonna Taylor and to Tamir Rice and Daunte Wright. And some music is playing, and some organizers are having their 8 a.m. meeting in what was formerly a gas station that now reads, "Where there's people, there's power." So today there will be a lot more gathering. There will be celebration of life here and in Common Park. And people are already sort of getting ready for that, even today at 8 a.m.
Sarah, you write in your piece for Bloomberg News that perhaps the most significant symbol of real transformation is embodied by what is now called George Floyd Square, which you just described for us. I'm wondering, though, about the city itself and the transformation that the city itself has gone through outside of George Floyd Square, through the police department, through city council, local government. To what extent has it changed in the last 12 months, and to what extent hasn't it changed?
Absolutely. I think there's a real, from my conversations with people on the ground, there's a real frustration with where the city is right now versus where promises said it would be a year ago. But there has been some real progress in the eyes of organizers and city council members as well. Last year, 9 city council members stood on stage in Powderhorn Park, right by Cup Foods and what's now George Floyd Square, and pledged to defund and dismantle the police department as it exists today and start anew. That hasn't happened. A ballot measure that could have brought them one step closer to doing that failed to make it onto the ballot last year. It's being resurrected this year. It would get rid of minimum staffing levels for police officers, and it would change the police department's approach to a more public health-oriented model. And meanwhile, the budget has changed as well. The city took $28 million out of the police budget and invested about $8 million into mental health interventions. But part of that was due to COVID belt-tightening. And this year, Mayor Frey has proposed spending more on police and adding more officers to the ground, citing a rise in crime. So it's a mixed bag.
And Sarah, I mean, just going off of that, based on some of the people that you've spoken with, where does that frustration lie in? Is it with lawmakers like Mayor Frey? Is it with sort of the national conversation about where we are right now with police reform? I mean, what is it that they're telling you?
What I'm hearing from people on the ground is that they've been working really hard to advocate for transformational change. And in terms of piecemeal reforms, Minneapolis had gone through many of them in the past. What people are asking for is to completely redefine public safety, or what some people are asking for. And there's disagreement over what that really means. I think there's widespread agreement that what happened last year was an abomination. But there's disagreement over how best to move forward. There's frustration with city council members who made sweeping promises last year and did not deliver. There's frustration with what's perceived as rising crime in cities across the country. And what's interesting about George Floyd Square is that there are people coming together to sort of forge that different future themselves, leaning on each other, leaning on their neighbors, forming mutual aid networks, community patrols. instead of relying on police in the way that they had to before.
What has been proposed? What has actually been experimented with? Because they're a big part of the conversation, not just in Minneapolis but nationally, has been about dismantling police departments and coming up with alternatives for public safety and to keep the public safe. What has worked and what has been proposed?
Absolutely. So it seems like one of the biggest shifts that has been piloted and instituted in cities across the country is diverting some mental health related calls away from police officers and to social workers or trained EMTs. That's been working for years in Eugene, Oregon, and it's been piloted this past year in New York City, in Denver, and that seems like the first step for a lot of cities, because that's something that there is wide agreement on, is that police officers do a lot of work that they don't need to be doing, that could be better served addressing violent crime and not these mental health concerns that could be perhaps better suited to public health individuals. And that's something that Minneapolis has been doing, and it's also something that's something Minneapolis has been doing at the city level and putting money behind, but it's also something that is emerging on a volunteer basis in George Floyd Square and in the surrounding areas where folks are unarmed and de-escalating situations, being violence interrupters, and also, again, looking out for each other instead of having to call 911 for non-criminal, non-life-threatening offenses.
Sarah, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for giving us a view on the ground. That's Bloomberg's Sarah Holder on the ground in Minneapolis. Thanks so much for your time, Sarah.